The first time Willa Lancaster saw blood on her hands, she discovered she was meant to heal rather than hide from the world's cruelties. And that discovery changed everything about the quiet life she thought she wanted in Custer, Montana territory, in the spring of 1882. She had been 22 years old then, just moved into the small homestead her late father had left her on the outskirts of town. The property consisted of a modest cabin, a barn that had seen better days, and 40 acres of grassland that stretched toward the mountains. Most women her age were married by then, but Willa had spent the last 4 years caring for her ailing father, watching the consumption slowly steal his breath until there was nothing left but memories and this land. The first animal she rescued was a fox caught in a trap, its leg mangled and infected. She had found it while checking the property line, drawn by pitiful whimpering that seemed to echo her own loneliness. Most people would have put the creature out of its misery with a bullet, but Willa had carried it home wrapped in her shawl, ignoring the frightened snapping of its teeth near her face. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, wrapped it in clean cloth torn from one of her petticoats, and kept the fox in a crate in the barn until it could walk again. 3 weeks later, she released it at dawn, watching its russet form disappear into the tall grass, and felt something in her chest expand with purpose. After that, it seemed injured creatures found her. A rabbit with a broken wing dragged itself to her porch. A coyote pup, abandoned and starving, showed up crying outside her barn. A deer with an arrow lodged in its shoulder somehow made its way to her property line and collapsed there, waiting. Word spread quietly among the townspeople that Willa Lancaster would take in wounded animals, though some thought it strange and others thought it foolish. She did not care much what they thought. The animals needed her, and she needed to be needed. By the autumn of 1883, her barn had become something of a sanctuary. She had built separate stalls and pens, learned which herbs stopped infection and which poultices drew out poison. She traded eggs and vegetables from her garden for medical supplies from Doc Patterson in town, who found her efforts curious but admirable enough to help. Her days developed a rhythm: morning chores, tending to her patients, afternoon gardening, evening feedings, and then the quiet nights alone in her cabin with only lamplight and the sounds of healing animals for company. She was content, or at least she told herself she was. Loneliness was simply the price of choosing a different path, of caring more for wounded things than for social expectations. The women in town had stopped inviting her to quilting circles, and the men had stopped trying to court her. She was the odd Lancaster girl who preferred animals to people, and that was fine. That was safer, anyway. Then Xavier Oldfield rode into her life on an October afternoon when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled like coming snow. Willa was in the barn, changing the dressing on a badger's injured paw, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, and stepped out into the fading sunlight. A man sat astride a buckskin horse, and even from a distance, she could see he was a cowboy through and through. Worn leather chaps, a brown vest over a faded blue shirt, a hat that had seen many seasons, and boots caked with trail dust. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a face weathered by sun and wind but undeniably handsome. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot, and she noticed he was cradling something against his chest with one hand. "Miss Lancaster." His voice was deeper than she expected, roughened by years of shouting over cattle and wind. "That is me." She stayed where she was, wary but curious. "Can I help you?" "I hope so, madam. Found this little fellow about 5 miles out." He moved closer, and she saw he was holding a small bird, a mountain bluebird by the look of it. Hawk got him, I think, wings torn up bad. Pete Mason at the general store said you might could do something for him. Willa felt her wariness soften immediately. She stepped forward, her attention shifting entirely to the injured creature. Bring him into the barn, quickly, before he goes into shock. Xavier followed her inside, ducking his head slightly even though he had plenty of clearance. The barn was surprisingly organized, with clean stalls and pens, shelves lined with supplies, and the smell of fresh hay stronger than any unpleasant odors. A few animals stirred at their arrival: the badger she had been tending, a young raccoon with a bandaged tail, an owl with a splinted leg. Set him down here, gently. Willa gestured to a workbench where she had a clean cloth already laid out. She lit 2 more lamps, flooding the area with light. Xavier carefully transferred the bird from his hands to the cloth. The bluebird was barely moving, its bright plumage dulled by shock and pain. One wing hung at an unnatural angle, the delicate bones clearly broken, and there were puncture marks from talons across its back. Will he make it? Xavier asked quietly, and there was genuine concern in his voice that made Willa glance up at him. I do not know yet, she said honestly, but I will try. She worked quickly, her hands steady and sure despite the delicate nature of the task. Xavier watched in silence as she cleaned the wounds with a solution that smelled of herbs and alcohol, as she carefully examined the wing, as she splinted the tiny bones with pieces of thin wood and wrapped them with strips of soft cloth. Her movements were practiced and confident, and Xavier found himself fascinated not just by what she was doing but by the intense focus on her face. She was pretty, he realized, though not in the conventional way most men seemed to prefer. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple braid, with wisps escaping around her face. She had intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see more than most people looked for, and a mouth that looked like it did not smile often but would be beautiful when it did. She was slender but clearly strong, her hands calloused from work, her forearms tanned from sun. There was something about her that reminded him of the wild things she tended, careful, watchful, ready to bolt. There, Willa finally said, stepping back. The bird was now nestled in a small box lined with soft cloth, the wing carefully immobilized. He needs rest and warmth. If he survives the night, his chances improve considerably. Thank you, Miss Lancaster. Xavier pulled off his hat, holding it in both hands. How much do I owe you? Nothing. She was already washing her hands in a basin. I do not charge for this. That does not seem right. You used supplies, your time. I do not charge, she repeated, more firmly. If he recovers and you want to bring me some firewood or help repair something around here, that would be welcome. But I do not take money for helping animals. Xavier studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. Mind if I check back tomorrow, see how he is doing? Willa hesitated. She was not accustomed to people wanting to check back, to continuing interactions beyond the initial drop-off. But there was something earnest in his question, a real caring that she recognized. If you like, she said finally, morning is best before it gets too warm. I will be here. He settled his hat back on his head, gave her a nod, and turned to leave. At the barn door, he paused and looked back. Name's Xavier Oldfield, by the way. I work on the Thompson Ranch north of here. I know the place. It was one of the larger cattle operations in the territory, running several thousand head across the open range. Well then, until tomorrow, Miss Lancaster. He touched the brim of his hat and was gone, mounting his horse in one smooth motion and riding back the way he had come. Willa stood in the barn doorway, watching him disappear down the rutted road, and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. She told herself, It was simply surprise at meeting someone who cared about the fate of a small bird. Nothing more. But that night, as she checked on her patients before bed, she found herself wondering if Xavier Oldfield would actually return, and realized with some confusion that she hoped he would. He did return, just after dawn, when mist still clung to the low places and the mountains were pink with new light. Willa had been up for an hour already, had checked on the bluebird 3 times, and had tried not to think too much about why she had chosen to wear her better dress instead of her usual work clothes. Xavier brought a string of fish, still fresh from the creek. "Thought you might could use these," he said, offering them with an almost shy smile. "Caught them at first light. Thank you." She took them, genuinely pleased. "That is kind of you." The bird made it through the night. His face brightened noticeably. "Can I see him?" They went into the barn together, and Willa showed him the small box where the bluebird rested. The creature looked marginally better in the morning light, its eyes more alert, its breathing steadier. "He is drinking water, which is a good sign," Willa explained. "I will try to get him to eat later today. Small insects, grubs if I can find them." "I could dig up some grubs for you," Xavier offered immediately. "My horse needs a rest anyway. I rode out early." "You do not have to do that. I know." He met her eyes. "I want to," so Xavier stayed. He found a shovel in her barn and dug in the soft earth near the creek that ran through her property, collecting grubs in a tin can. While he worked, Willa went about her morning chores, feeding the other animals, changing dressings, checking wounds. She was acutely aware of his presence, of the sound of the shovel biting into earth, of his quiet humming as he worked. When he brought her the can of grubs, she managed to get the bluebird to eat too, and Xavier watched with the satisfaction of someone who had contributed to something meaningful. "You are good at this," he said, leaning against the workbench. "The healing, I mean, did someone teach you?" "Not exactly." Willa cleaned her hands again. "I read everything I could find, medical texts, veterinary guides, even old herbal remedies from my grandmother's journal. Mostly I learned by trying, by paying attention to what worked and what did not. That takes courage. You could have hurt them trying." "I could have." She looked at him directly. "But no one else was going to help them, so the choice was to try or let them suffer. That seemed worse." Xavier nodded slowly. "I understand that." Something in his tone made her curious. "Do you?" "My sister was sick when we were children," he said quietly. "Some kind of wasting disease. Doctors said there was nothing to be done, told my parents to prepare for the worst. But my mother refused to accept it. She tried everything, every remedy she heard of, things people said were foolish or superstitious. Most of it probably did not help, but something did, or maybe my sister was just stronger than anyone knew. She lived. She is married now, has 3 children, lives in Colorado." He smiled slightly. "So yes, I understand trying when others say it is hopeless. Sometimes trying is the bravest thing there is." Willa found herself smiling back, a real smile that felt unfamiliar on her face. "I am glad your sister survived." "Me too." He straightened, seemed to realize he had been there for over an hour. "I should get going, need to get back to the ranch." "Of course." She walked him out to where his horse was grazing peacefully near the barn. "Thank you for the fish and the grubs." "My pleasure, Miss Lancaster." He swung into the saddle, looked down at her. "Mind if I check back again? Want to see how that little bird does?" "You are welcome any time," Willa said, and meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. Xavier grinned, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. "I will hold you to that." He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each time he brought something. More fish, a rabbit he had shot for her stew pot, firewood already chopped and stacked. Each time he stayed a little longer, helping with chores, repairing things around her property that had needed fixing for months. He mended a section of fence, replaced rotted boards in the barn, oiled the hinges on her cabin door so it no longer creaked. The bluebird improved steadily under Willa's care. Within a week, it was eating regularly and showing signs of spirit, chirping indignantly when she changed its dressings. Xavier took absurd pleasure in these signs of recovery, as if he had personally saved the bird himself. "You are getting attached," Willa observed one afternoon as Xavier sat next to the bird's box, watching it with undisguised fondness. Maybe. He did not deny it. Never really paid much attention to birds before. They were just there, part of the background, but this little fellow fought hard to live, makes you think about things differently. "That is what they do," Willa said softly. "The animals, I mean. They make you see the world through their eyes for a while. Everything becomes more immediate, more precious. Life and death are not abstract concepts but daily realities." Xavier looked at her thoughtfully. "Is that why you do this? To see the world that way?" "Partly." She sat down on a bale of hay, realized they were having an actual conversation, not just exchanging pleasantries. It felt strange and wonderful. "Mostly I do it because they need help and I can provide it. It is that simple." "Nothing about you is simple, Willa Lancaster." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice did something to her heart, made it beat faster in a way that was both alarming and thrilling. "You do not know me well enough to say that," she managed. "Then let me know you better." He said it simply, directly, his dark eyes steady on hers. "I would like that very much." Willa felt fear and hope war inside her chest. She had spent so long alone, so long building walls between herself and the possibility of hurt, that the idea of letting someone in felt dangerous. But Xavier was looking at her like she was someone worth knowing, worth the effort, and that look was harder to resist than she had imagined. "Why?" The question came out almost as a whisper. "Because you are different from anyone I have ever met." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hat dangling from his fingers. "Because you care about things most people ignore. Because you have made something meaningful out here by yourself, and that takes strength and vision. Because when you smile, which is not often enough, it lights up your whole face and I find myself wanting to see it again." He paused. "And because every time I ride away from here, I spend the whole trip back thinking about when I can come back. That seems like something worth paying attention to." Willa could not breathe properly. No one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever looked past her oddness and her isolation to see anything worth valuing. "I am not good with people," she said finally, needing him to understand. "I do not know how to make pleasant conversation or behave the way women are supposed to behave. I am more comfortable with animals than humans. I do not go to church socials or quilting bees. I wear trousers when I work because skirts are impractical. People in town think I am strange." "People in town are not me," Xavier's voice was gentle. "And I think you are remarkable." The word hung in the air between them, shimmering with possibility. "I would like to know you better too," Willa admitted quietly. "I am just not sure I know how. We will figure it out together." He smiled at her, and she felt something inside her begin to unfurl, like a flower that had been closed tight against the cold finally daring to open to the sun. From that day forward, Xavier came every day unless weather or work absolutely prevented it. He became a fixture around her homestead, as much a part of her daily routine as feeding the animals or tending her garden. They fell into an easy partnership, dividing tasks without needing to discuss them. He handled the heavy work, chopping wood, hauling water, repairing structures. She managed the animals and the garden. In the evenings, they would sit on her porch and talk as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and red. They talked about everything. Xavier told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, about coming west after his parents died, about the hard lessons learned working cattle across the territories. Willa told him about her father, about the loneliness of watching someone you love fade away, about discovering that healing animals gave her life purpose and direction. "You ever want more than this?" Xavier asked one evening as they watched the first stars appear. "A bigger place, maybe in town, where more people could bring you animals." "No." Willa did not have to think about it. "This is enough. More would mean losing the quiet, the peace. This is about the animals, not about building something grand." "I understand that." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "I feel the same about ranching. Some of the men I work with dream about having huge spreads, thousands of cattle, being cattle barons. But I just want a decent piece of land, a good herd, room to breathe. The work itself is what matters, not the empire." "You think you will get that someday?" "Your own ranch, working on it." He stretched his legs out. "Been saving my wages for years. Thompson pays fair and I do not spend much. Figure another 2 years, maybe 3, I will have enough to buy land and starter stock. Just need to find the right piece of ground." Something in Willa's chest tightened at the thought of Xavier leaving, going off to start his own place somewhere else. She had grown so accustomed to his presence, to the way her days had expanded to include him, that the idea of returning to solitude felt unbearable. But she said nothing, just filed the fear away to examine later. The bluebird continued to heal. After 3 weeks, Willa removed the splint from its wing, and they both held their breath as the bird stretched the limb experimentally. It was still weak, still healing, but the bones had set properly and the feathers were growing back. "He's going to fly again," Xavier said with satisfaction. "You did that." "We did that," Willa corrected. "You found him, brought him here, helped care for him. I just dug up some grubs." But he looked pleased at the inclusion. "You did more than that." Willa looked at him, this man who had become so central to her life in such a short time. "You stayed." The words carried more weight than their simple surface meaning, and Xavier heard it. He reached over and took her hand, the first time they had touched beyond accidental brushes while working. His hand was calloused and warm, strong and gentle at the same time. "I will keep staying, Willa, as long as you will have me." She turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. "I do not want you to leave." "Then I will not." They sat like that as the evening deepened into night, holding hands on her porch, and Willa felt something she had not felt since before her father died, the simple comfort of not being alone. Winter arrived with a vengeance in late November, bringing snow that piled in drifts against the barn and wind that howled down from the mountains like a living thing. Willa worried about her animals, about keeping them warm enough, about finding food for the ones who could not yet be released. Xavier showed up during the first big storm, leading his horse through snow already knee-deep, carrying supplies from town. "You should not have come in this weather," Willa scolded, but she was relieved to see him, more relieved than she wanted to admit. "Could not leave you out here alone in this." He stomped snow off his boots. "Thompson gave me leave to stay a few days if needed until the worst passes." "Stay here." Willa felt her heart start to race. "In the barn." Xavier looked at her steadily. "Unless you think that is improper." "I do not want to damage your reputation." Willa almost laughed. "I stopped worrying about my reputation when I started living alone and rescuing wild animals. The barn is drafty and cold, though. You can sleep in the cabin. I have a second room and there is a door between." So Xavier stayed, and Willa discovered what it was like to share her space with another person. He was considerate to the point of being overly cautious, always asking permission before doing anything, trying to make himself as unobtrusive as possible. She found it endearing and frustrating in equal measure. "You do not have to ask if you can make coffee," she said on the second morning, finding him hovering uncertainly near the stove. "Just make it. Did not want to presume. Xavier, you rebuilt half my barn. I think you can make coffee without asking." He grinned at that and became gradually more comfortable. They fell into a domestic routine that felt natural despite its newness. He cooked breakfast while she tended the animals. She made lunch while he cleared snow from pathways. They prepared dinner together, moving around each other in the small cabin kitchen with an ease that suggested years of practice rather than days. The storm lasted nearly a week. The world outside became a white wilderness, beautiful and deadly. They kept the fires burning, kept the animals warm and fed, and spent the long evenings talking or reading aloud to each other from Willa's small collection of books. Sometimes they played cards, and Willa discovered Xavier was terrible at bluffing and she could beat him consistently. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts but content in the other's presence. One evening, as the wind howled particularly fiercely outside, Xavier looked up from the sock he was mending and said, "I could get used to this." To being trapped in a cabin during a blizzard. Willa was working on a piece of embroidery, one of the few traditionally feminine activities she actually enjoyed. To being here with you, to this feeling like home. He set the sock aside. "Willa, I need to tell you something." She set down her embroidery, her heart suddenly pounding. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you." He said it simply, directly, the way he said most things. "I probably started falling the day I brought you that bird and watched you work to save it. I have been falling harder every day since." "I needed you to know." Willa felt tears prick her eyes. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." "Why afraid?" "Because loving someone means they can leave, means they can die, means you can lose them." The words came out thick with emotion. "I lost my mother when I was 12, my father 2 years ago. I decided it was safer not to love anyone else, not to open myself up to that kind of pain again." Xavier moved from his chair to kneel beside her, taking her hands in his. "I cannot promise I will never die, Willa. None of us can promise that. But I can promise I will not leave you by choice. I can promise that whatever time we have, I will spend it loving you the best way I know how. And I can promise that the risk of love is worth taking, because the alternative is living only half a life." She looked into his eyes, saw the sincerity there, the strength and kindness that had drawn her to him from the start. "I am afraid I do not know how to be what you need. I do not know how to be a proper sweetheart or wife. I only know how to be myself. Yourself is exactly what I need." He reached up and touched her face gently. "May I kiss you?" she nodded, not trusting her voice, and Xavier leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and restrained passion. When they pulled apart, Willa was trembling. "I have never done that before," she whispered. "Never been kissed." Xavier looked surprised but not displeased. "Never wanted anyone close enough to try." She touched her lips wonderingly. "Can we do it again?" he laughed, a warm sound that filled the small cabin. "We can do it as many times as you want." They kissed again, longer this time, and Willa felt the walls she had built around her heart finally crumble completely. She was in love with Xavier Oldfield, and terrifying as that was, it also felt like coming home. When the storm finally broke and the sun emerged to shine on a transformed landscape, everything looked different to Willa. The world was still the same, but she saw it through new eyes, eyes that had let someone else in. Xavier stayed 2 more days, helping her dig out from the snow, making sure she had enough supplies, chopping enough wood to last through the next storm. "I need to get back to the ranch," he said reluctantly on the morning he planned to leave. Been gone over a week. Thompson is understanding, but I need to pull my weight. I know. Willa helped him saddle his horse, dreading the moment he would ride away. I will be back every Sunday, he promised. That is my day off, and if I can get away during the week, I will. Every Sunday. It seemed too good to be true. Every single one. He kissed her, right there in her barnyard with the winter sun shining down. I love you, Willa Lancaster. I love you too, Xavier Oldfield. She watched him ride away, and instead of the usual loneliness settling over her, she felt hope. He would come back. He had promised, and she believed him. The winter weeks passed in a pattern of anticipation and fulfillment. Willa worked with her animals, tended her homestead, and counted the days until Sunday. Xavier came without fail, arriving early and staying as late as he could, helping with chores and holding her close. They talked about the future in careful, hopeful terms. He told her about the land he was looking at, a section not far from her own property. She told him she liked the idea of him being close. The bluebird, fully healed now, was released on a clear day in January. They stood together in the barnyard, and Willa opened the small box. For a moment, the bird just sat there, as if uncertain of its freedom. Then it spread its wings, the same wings that had been broken and damaged, and took flight. It circled once overhead, a flash of brilliant blue against the white snow and gray sky, and then disappeared toward the mountains. You did good, Xavier said, his arm around Willa's shoulders. He did the hard part, Willa replied. He survived. So did you. Xavier turned her to face him. You survived losing your parents, survived being alone, survived all the things that should have made you bitter and closed off. Instead, you made a place where broken things could heal. That is extraordinary, Willa. She leaned into him, grateful for his warmth and his understanding. I am not alone anymore. No, you are not. As winter melted into spring, their relationship deepened and strengthened. Xavier formally asked Willa to marry him on an April evening when the aspens were budding new leaves and the meadows were carpeted with wildflowers. He did it simply, without grand gestures or flowery speeches, just took her hand and said, I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me? Willa did not hesitate. Yes. They were married in May at the small church in Custer with only a handful of people present. Doc Patterson, who had befriended Willa through her animal work, Pete Mason from the general store and his wife, Thompson, Xavier's employer, and his family. It was a simple ceremony, but Willa wore a new dress in pale blue and carried wildflowers, and Xavier wore a clean shirt and looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. After the ceremony, they returned to her homestead, which was now their homestead. Xavier had used his savings to buy the adjacent land he had been eyeing, increasing their property to nearly 100 acres. He planned to run a small herd of cattle, and they would build a new house eventually, something bigger with room for the future. But for now, the cabin and barn were enough. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of nervous laughter and gentle discoveries. Willa had been anxious, inexperienced as she was, but Xavier was patient and loving, and by the time the moon rose high outside their window, she felt like she understood a new kind of healing, the kind that came from two people joining their lives and hearts completely. The next few years were full and rich. Xavier built his cattle operations slowly and carefully, buying quality stock and managing them well. Willa continued her animal rescue work, and Xavier built her a larger barn with better facilities. Word spread and people started coming from farther away, bringing injured animals they hoped she could save. She took in everything: cows with difficult births, horses with broken legs, dogs hit by wagons, cats caught in machinery. She saved some and lost others, and each loss hurt, but the successes made it worthwhile. They worked side by side, building something together that was more than either could have created alone. Xavier proved to have a gentle touch with injured animals, despite his rough cowboy exterior. Willa proved to be a surprisingly good hand with cattle, unafraid of the large animals and willing to do whatever needed doing. They complemented each other perfectly, each making the other better. On their first anniversary, Willa told Xavier she was pregnant. They were in the barn, tending to a young elk with an injured leg, when she simply turned to him and said, "We are going to have a baby." Xavier stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that startled every animal in the building. He picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" Willa asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy, Willa, I am more than happy, I am thrilled, I am terrified, I am grateful." He cupped her face in his hands. "We are going to be parents. In about 7 months, the way I figure it, then we have work to do." Xavier's mind was already racing. Need to finish the new house before winter, need to build a proper crib, need to make sure we have everything ready. "Xavier." Willa put her hands over his. "We have time." But Xavier threw himself into preparations with single-minded focus. He worked from dawn until dusk on the new house, determined to have it finished before the baby came. It was a proper house with 4 rooms downstairs and 2 upstairs, built solid to withstand the harsh Montana winters. Willa helped when he would let her, though he increasingly treated her like she might break if she lifted anything heavier than a teacup. "I am pregnant, not ill," she reminded him more than once. "I know, but I want you safe, want both of you safe." His protectiveness was endearing even when it was frustrating. Willa continued her work with the animals, though she was more careful now, more aware of the life growing inside her. She felt good, strong, healthy. Her body changed gradually, her belly swelling with new life, and Xavier looked at her with such wonder and love that she sometimes felt overwhelmed by the depth of her happiness. They moved into the new house in September, just as the aspens were turning gold again. It smelled of fresh wood and paint, and their furniture looked sparse in the larger rooms, but it was theirs and it was beautiful. Xavier had built it with his own hands, every board and nail a testament to his love for her and their coming child. The baby came in late January during a snowstorm, because of course it did. Xavier had to ride through the storm to fetch Doc Patterson, and Willa labored alone in their bedroom, trying to remember everything she knew about birthing from helping animals. It was different doing it herself, feeling her body work to bring new life into the world, but she trusted the process, trusted her body. Doc Patterson arrived, snow-covered and worried, to find Willa calm and managing well. Xavier looked like he might faint, but Willa held his hand and told him she was fine, and hours later, just as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born. They named him William, after Willa's father. He was small and red and perfect, with his father's dark hair, and, as he grew, his mother's gray eyes. Xavier held him with infinite gentleness, this big rough cowboy cradling a tiny baby like he was the most precious thing in the world. Willa nursed him and rocked him and felt her heart expand to dimensions she had not known were possible. Parenthood was harder than either had anticipated, but also more rewarding. Sleepless nights and endless work were balanced by first smiles and small miracles. William grew strong and healthy, crawling and then walking and then running everywhere he could. He showed an early fascination with the animals, toddling out to the barn to visit Willa's patients, gentle with them in a way that made both parents proud. When William was 2, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time it was twins, a boy and a girl. Xavier nearly did faint when Doc Patterson confirmed it, but then he laughed and said of course they would have twins, Nothing with Willa was ever simple. The twins, James and Grace, arrived in early autumn, and the house suddenly felt both crowded and perfectly full. Xavier hired a girl from town, Sally Preston, to help Willa with the children and the housework so she could continue her animal work. Sally was 16 and eager, the daughter of a widow who needed the income. She proved to be a blessing, good with the children and unafraid of hard work. The years flowed by, marked by the seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Xavier's cattle operation grew steadily. He never became a cattle baron, never wanted to, but he built a solid business that provided well for his family. Willa's animal rescue work expanded, and people came from increasingly far away seeking her help. She gained a reputation as someone who could save animals others had given up on, and while some still thought her odd, most respected her skill. William grew into a sturdy boy with his father's easy way with animals and his mother's gentle, healing touch. The twins were inseparable, James bold and adventurous, Grace quiet and thoughtful. Xavier and Willa watched their children grow with gratitude and wonder, never taking for granted the family they had built together. When William was 7, a young cowboy rode up to their house one afternoon leading a horse with a badly injured leg. The cowboy was young and looked near tears, explaining the horse had stepped in a hole and the boss said it should be shot, but he could not bring himself to do it. Willa examined the leg carefully. It was broken but clean. "I can try to save him," she said, "but it will take months of healing, and even then he may never be sound enough to work cattle again." "I do not care about that," the young cowboy said. "He is my horse, had him since he was a colt." "Please, madam, if there is any chance." Willa looked at Xavier, who nodded. "We will do everything we can," she promised. They worked on that horse for months. Xavier built a special sling to keep weight off the injured leg. Willa splinted and bandaged and monitored healing. William helped too, bringing the horse food and water, talking to him softly. The young cowboy came every week to visit, always bringing payment in the form of work or supplies, though Willa told him it was not necessary. The horse healed. Slowly, gradually, but he healed. By spring, he was walking on all 4 legs, and by summer, he was sound enough to ride at a walk. The young cowboy cried when they told him, and Willa felt the familiar warmth of knowing they had saved something precious. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers. Cattle died, crops failed, money was sometimes tight. But Xavier and Willa faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each challenge overcome. They rarely fought, and when they did, they worked through it quickly, neither willing to let anger fester between them. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. The children were asleep inside, exhausted from a day of play. The barn held a dozen healing animals. The cattle grazed peacefully on the hillsides. Everything was quiet and peaceful. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked, his arm around Willa's shoulders. "Taking me in when I showed up with that bird?" "Not once." Willa leaned into him. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Xavier Oldfield. You and our children and this life we built together." "I fell in love with you that first day," he admitted. "Watched you work to save that little bird and knew you were someone special, someone worth staying for. And you did stay." Willa turned to look at him, seeing the gray threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, the face she loved more than any other. "You stayed and you loved me, and you gave me a family I never thought I would have. You saved me, Willa. Just like you save all those animals. I was broken in ways I did not even realize, and you healed me." They sat together as the stars emerged, holding hands the way they had that first evening, and Willa thought about the bluebird that had brought them together. She liked to think it was still out there somewhere, flying through these same mountains, healed and whole and free. The years continued their steady march. William grew tall and decided he wanted to be a veterinarian, inspired by his mother's work. He left for school in Denver when he was 18, and Willa cried for a week, but was so proud she thought she might burst. The twins were 14 by then, James already helping his father full-time with the ranch, Grace showing a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the animals and landscape around them in stunning detail. Willa was 41 now, Xavier 45. They were settled into middle age, comfortable in their lives and with each other. They still kissed every morning and every night. They still sat on their porch most evenings, talking about their day. They still worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. One spring afternoon, a young woman rode up to their house. She was perhaps 20, with dark hair and nervous eyes, and she was bleeding from a wound on her arm. "Please," she said, swaying in her saddle. "They said you help creatures that are hurt. I did not know where else to go." Xavier caught her as she fell, and Willa ran for her medical supplies. The woman had been shot, the bullet grazing her arm but causing significant bleeding. As Willa cleaned and stitched the wound, the woman told her story. She had been working in a saloon in a town 30 miles east when the owner had attacked her. She had fought back, escaped, and he had shot at her as she fled. "He will come looking for me," the woman said, her voice shaking. "He is a powerful man in that town. No one will believe me over him." "You are safe here," Xavier said firmly. "No one is going to hurt you on our land." The woman, whose name was Sarah, stayed with them for 3 weeks while her arm healed. Willa taught her about treating wounds and caring for animals. Xavier taught her to shoot a rifle properly. Grace befriended her, and Sarah taught Grace to style her hair and shared stories of the wider world beyond their ranch. When Sarah left, she was stronger and more confident. She thanked them with tears in her eyes and promised to write. She did write, several times a year, telling them she had found work as a seamstress in Helena, that she was safe and making her own way. Willa treasured those letters, proof that healing came in many forms. More years passed, good years and hard years all woven together into a life fully lived. William came home from school a full veterinarian, set up practice in Custer, and married a sweet girl named Emily from a neighboring ranch. They gave Xavier and Willa their first grandchild, a boy named Xavier, when Willa was 46. She cried when she held him, this tiny new life named for the man she loved, the continuation of their story into a new generation. James took over more of the ranch operations as Xavier slowed down, proving to be a natural cattleman with a good head for business. Grace surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to study art in San Francisco. Xavier did not want to let her go so far, but Willa convinced him they had to let their children find their own paths. Grace left with their blessing and came home twice a year, each time more sophisticated and worldly, but still their same sweet girl underneath. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch. William and Emily with their 3 children, James with his new bride Margaret, Grace home from California with paintings to show them. They had a big celebration with music and dancing, and at the end of the night, Xavier stood up and made a speech. 25 years ago, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I found a wounded bird and brought it to a woman I did not know. I thought I was just trying to save that bird, but really that bird saved me. It brought me to Willa, and Willa brought me to this life, this family, this happiness I never dreamed was possible. I love you, Willa Lancaster Oldfield. Thank you for taking me in. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Willa could not speak past the tears, so she just kissed him while their children and grandchildren cheered. More years came and went. Xavier's hair turned fully gray, then white. Willa's face gained lines and her hands became gnarled with age, but they were still capable, still skilled at healing. They moved slower now, tired more easily, but they were content. They had built something lasting, something meaningful. When Willa was 53, a young boy brought her a bluebird with a broken wing. She stared at it, remembering that day 30 years ago when Xavier had arrived with the same kind of bird and felt time collapse into itself. "Can you save him?" the boy asked anxiously. "Yes," Willa said, her voice certain. "I can save him." She worked on that bird with all the skill accumulated over decades, and Xavier stood beside her, watching with the same fascination he had shown all those years ago. The bird healed and was released, and as they watched it fly away into the Montana sky, Xavier took Willa's hand. "We have had a good life," he said. "The best life," Willa agreed. "Thank you for bringing me that first bird, Xavier. Thank you for staying." "I will always stay," he promised. The same promise he had made so many years ago, and Willa knew it was true. They lived into their 70s, Xavier and Willa, growing old together on the land they loved. Their children and grandchildren visited often. The animal rescue work continued, though William took over most of it as Willa's hands became too unsteady. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management. Grace became a successful artist, her paintings of Montana landscapes and wildlife sought after across the country. Xavier died peacefully in his sleep when he was 74, Willa beside him as she had been beside him for nearly 40 years. She held his hand and told him she loved him, and he smiled at her and told her he would see her again someday, and then he was gone. Willa grieved deeply but not bitterly. She had had him for so long, had been loved so completely, that even in loss she felt grateful. She continued living on the ranch, surrounded by her family, still occasionally helping with an animal that needed her particular touch. She told stories to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about their grandfather, about the cowboy who had brought her a wounded bird and stayed. When Willa died 4 years later at 78, she died in the same bed where she had slept beside Xavier for decades, where they had loved and talked and built their life together. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, and in her last moments, she swore she could hear the sound of wings and see a flash of blue against the sky. They buried her next to Xavier on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a view of the mountains and the valley below. The gravestone reads simply, "Willa Lancaster Oldfield, healer of broken things, beloved wife and mother." Beside it, Xavier's stone read, "Xavier Oldfield, beloved husband and father, he stayed." The ranch continued through the generations, always a place where injured animals could find help, always a testament to the love between a cowboy and a woman who had dared to stay despite her fear. And every spring, bluebirds returned to nest in the trees around the property, their bright wings a reminder that healing is possible, that love endures, and that sometimes the best things in life begin with the simple act of caring for something broken and believing it can be whole again.